I confidently pronounce for a truth that I lie. This remark is found in A True Story, a space odyssey of intergalactic warfare, sentient lamps, and cityscape leviathans. This is no lost Star Wars episode, you sweet summer child. It precedes it. Peer back to 2nd century Greece, and you'll find Lucian of Somosata, an Assyrian satirist beloved for his inventive wit and absurd commentaries. The aforementioned A True Story is regarded as both his most popular novel and the progenitor of modern science fiction books. But why was it written? Why was it so popular? Well, it was funny. It scoffed at the conventions used in early writings of travel logs, which were equal parts guidebook and blatant exaggerations. Authors discovered that writing tall tales of lands beyond the Pillars of Hercules was more captivating than the mundane journaling of foreign life. Foreign meaning the world outside Western civilization. In an era where discoveries of new lands was commonplace, historians would document what they see. I use historian loosely. A better term would be anthropologist, but this distinction didn't exist at the time. I'll provide you with some examples of this. In this sandy desert are ants, not as big as dogs, but bigger than foxes. The Persian king has some of these, which have been caught there. These ants live underground, digging out the sand in the same way as the ants in Greece, to which they are very similar in shape, and the sand which they carry from the holes is full of gold. The gold there, whether dug from the earth or brought down by rivers, or got as I have described, is very abundant. There too, wool more beautiful and excellent than the wool of sheep grows on wild trees. These trees supply the Indians with clothing. For the spice-bearing trees are guarded by small winged snakes of varied color, many around each tree. These are the snakes that attack Egypt. Nothing except the smoke of storax will drive them away from the trees. Well, flying snakes, rivers of gold, and fox-sized ants. These are from the histories by Herodotus, a documentation of the travels by the aforenamed man. To his credit, Herodotus stated in his notes that these tales felt outlandish and impossible, but tasked himself to truthfully tell the tales as they happened. With no way for the common man to see for himself, you just gotta believe the guy. Another commonly known example is Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, an amplification of the Trojan War, told with an artistic license. People ate it up. It was this accuracy only in broad strokes that attracted both fans and writers to this scene, where others sought to copy the formula presented by Herodotus and Homer. Lucian mocked it. Within the first few paragraphs, Lucian makes his intentions clear. For this one thing I confidently pronounce for a truth, that I lie, and this, I hope, may be an excuse for all the rest, when I confess what I am faulty in. For I write of matters which I neither saw nor suffered, nor heard by report from others, which are in no being, nor possible ever to have a beginning. Let no man, therefore, in any case, give any credit to them. Everything he says is a work of fiction, not magnified retellings like those other writers. The adventure starts with Lucian sailing from the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar as we know it, with a crew of 50 men. A curiosity of the mind and a longing to learn out the bounds of the ocean were his motivations. Undeterred by a 90-day storm, our heroes happen upon an island. The would-be Argonauts traverse a river of wine overflowing with yeast-filled fish and womanly grape vineyards. Drinking from the stream dulled their senses, and some took attraction to the femininely shaped tops of the branches. Two men lulled by the femme fatales found themselves ensnared by sprigs, becoming part of the local fauna. Unable to rescue them, Lucian and his remaining companions set off again into the open sea. It's here where arguments for science fiction begin. Through a series of good fortune and luck, a whirlwind picks up the sailors, having them travel through the skies for 7 days and 7 nights. Upon the 8th, they land on the moon. The Hippogippians, a race of men that flew on 3-headed vultures, make themselves known. The absurdities of the scene beyond reason are evident. These vultures were massive. They were more akin to mammoths, with their wings mimicking the height and structure of a ship's mast. In perfect Greek, one of the riders asked, "Are you not strangers, Grecians?" and questioned the methods for their trip to the moon. The lingua franca obviously applies to the moon like it does on Earth. The men take the Grecians to their king, Endymion, who, to our surprise, was a Grecian himself. Feeling a sense of camaraderie with his kinsmen, Endymion asks the lost sailors for their aid in battle. There's an ongoing war between the moon and the sun people. A time ago, the two were colonies under Endymion's rule, yet a false king, Phaeton, usurped the sun throne and claimed it as his own. Lucian's men agree to help him reclaim the land. After a feast, galactic warfare follows suit. Giant spiders spin webs connecting the sun and moon. A score of 200,000 men split between the two constellations are at a standstill with one another. The wild beasts on both sides take Lucian's interests. To his right, there were the Hippogippians, loyal to Endymion, riding alongside him like winged Valkyries. Lachanopters, giant owls with the texture of lettuce, were at their flank. The moon people were not without allies, as the Silotoxans and Anemodromians from the Bear Star covered their left. The Silotoxans rode upon giant fleas the size of elephants, while the Anemodromians were flying humans who caught the wind via the flaps of their skin. Lucian breaks away from the intense scene to make a note of the Cappadocian reinforcements. They never arrived, so he knew nothing of them other than their name. For the sun, their entourage consisted of the Hippomyrmex, ants the size of acre-long farms, aeroconopes, winged gnats with archers, aerocardates, foot soldiers with poisonous turnip slings, colomycetes, mushroom men with asparagus spears, and finally the Cynobelanians, a race of furry dog men riding upon winged acorns. As I said before, all this information was hastily written by Lucian before the battle began. Civil to a point, the opposing sides waited for the signal to officially attack. When the battle commenced, much to Lucian's humor and Phaeton's disappointment, the aerocardates left. Supposedly, Phaeton had been unjust to them, and this battle was a perfect time to point out the quarrels with their ruler. Midway through the battle, Phaeton's reinforcements arrived, winged centaurs, in a number so vast Lucian didn't dare notate it, because it'd be seen as a lie. Flying acorns and farm-sized ants are plausible, but quantitating horsemen is where he draws the line. Overwhelmed, the moon men were pushed back to their city, where Lucian was taken captive. Arms bound by cobweb, Lucian is taken across to the sun. The Sun People were not laying siege to the moon, but rather erecting a wall of clouds to keep them in a perpetual night. Endymion, so upset by this endeavor, immediately calls for a peace treaty and sends 2 of his own ambassadors to the sun. Phaeton accepts. Lucian is reunited with his friends, and the sun and moon celebrate 7 days of festivities to commence their new alliance. So all that war was for nothing. Endymion could have brokered a peace long ago because, lo and behold, Phaeton is actually a really swell guy. But what about the Aerocardaches? Didn't they leave because Phaeton was so cruel? The sun. Well, they can't all be zingers, and Lucian doesn't dwell on this, so I won't. During these 7 days, Lucian takes a great deal of time to document the culture and lives of these people. For his part in the war, Endymion offers Lucian one of his sons in marriage. There are no women on the moon after all. None of the natives here have actually seen one. The men are born from a seed resting in the calves of their peers past 25 years of age. These seeds, once cut open, sprout a tree from which all men are born. The men themselves are not like those on Earth. Rather, they are bald, except for the hair on their knees, which many of them will groom to have a sporting beard. A singular toe, like hooves, makes up their feet. Their sweat is akin to honey. When doing intense labor or exercise, they anoint their body with milk, so should they sweat, cheese can be made to snack on. The rich are adorned with garments of glass, whereas the poor men's attire is made of woven brass. Their eyes, well, Lucian again doubts his own credibility for the absurdity he's about to proclaim. Their eyes are interchangeable, able to be taken on and off at their leisure. For food, they feast on frogs, which are made abundant on the moon. Not only do they eat them, but the vapors made from heating them are edible, and it's a common occurrence to lap it up as the smoke rises. Bean vines litter the surface, from which beans, berry, and water all come. The air is their primary liquid source, as it's dense enough to beat into a mortar until it's a drinkable dew. Lucian makes a note on the moon men's looking glass. If anyone peers into it, he can see the comings and goings of any place on Earth, as if being placed in the location himself. Lucian imagines his own city, and wonders if anyone down there could actually bear witness. Now, if anyone proclaims this as a farce, Lucian had already conjured a solution. But if they believe it not to be so, let them take the pains to go hither themselves, and they shall find my words true. Alas, Lucian's time on the moon had come to an end. Longing to be back at sea, he and his crew set off again. Endymion, heartbroken by this, gave Lucian a parting gift of glass attire and a Hippogippian fleet to protect his men until they were back on Earth. They sailed through the zodiac and the sun, where on the 2nd day they found themselves not on Earth, but rather Lycnopolis, a planet of sentient lamps. The island was suspended in the clouds, with shimmering glares running to and fro. Upon closer inspection, our travelers found themselves in a city of lights, sentient lamps making haste across markets, streets, or wherever their goings about led them. Some were made of fine brass, being polished, tall, and well kept, with names etched on their brazen holds. Others had seen better days, rust and age showing on their once luminous metals, and dents bending their shapes. They weren't without civility, however. When the travelers landed in their port, the lamps were quick to tend to the foreign Grecians, They invited Lucian and his men to a feast to warm their bellies, and offered soft beds to rest their weary souls. Kind as they were, the sailors were frightful of their surroundings and declined the hospitalities. This did not, however, stop Lucian from documenting and exploring the surrounding areas. The town itself was much like any other Grecian port city. Minus the floating nature of the island, Lynchopolis was home to a brewery, inns, craftsman shops, and whatever else would befit a municipality. The white clay buildings were reminiscent of Santorini, especially with the multicolored dome roofs littering the landscape like a patchwork quilt. They even had stairs and doors, which struck the sailors as odd. The lamps merely floated above the ground, standing eye level with many of the men. They'd elevate themselves above stairways and push doors and other contraptions with steam protruding from their orifices. In the center of their town stood a plaza, where their governor presided every night and took roll call of each lamp. When this occurred, the activities of the town stopped. The lamps made their way to the town square, waiting for their name to be called. If a lamp failed to be in attendance, they were quenched, snuffing out the light that gave these lamps life. You see, dear listener, failing to attend these daily calls was much like abandoning your rank. The city of Lynchopolis did not do well with deserters. It was during this roll call that Lucian had recognized the significance of these names: Pericles, Leonidas, Trigles. These were men familiar to him. Each of these lamps were pieces of furniture adorning the homes of Grecians back home. Lucian found his own lamp and would converse with it through the night. Over drinks and a fire, he confided in his light, telling stories of his adventures and his lamp doing the same, relaying to him the information and gossip that went about in his own home. On the next day, the sailors set off again, taking to the sky once more. Another city was set before them, the city of Nephalocoxigia, but before they could land, a storm fell upon them. The travelers were swept by harsh winds for 4 days, and on the 5th found themselves back on the open seas of Earth. Their joy turned to surprise and then fear when monstrous fish and sea serpents made themselves known. Of these, a colossal whale, spanning over 1,500 furlongs, enough to house a city with 20,000 men, emerged from the sea. The Leviathan made quick work of our Argonauts, swallowing the ship and its crew whole. This was not the end of their story, as the ship evaded the gnawing bite of the giant, which resembled more so speleothems of a great cavern than teeth of a sea dweller. Within the whale was darkness, and in this darkness the sailors traveled on and on. It bellowed and creaked like an ancient machine, and when the sailors felt like they could stomach the darkness and noise no longer, they found themselves in the belly of the Colossus. Here, much to their surprise, was light. Not only light, but beckoning hills, mountains and islands, with growing fauna, spiraling trees, and fish swimming in the streams and lakes the whale had swallowed. The light was not that of the sun, but rather of glowing lichen and ivy. It gave a sickly hue to the landscape, coating everything in a fog the color of rusted copper. Seagulls and halcyons flew above the weary travelers, and our sailors followed the birds to a thick forested mass of land. Some men started upon a fire, others began to hunt for food. Lucian and a select group of 12 investigated the hollowing of a dog they heard not far off from where they docked. During this journey, Lucian takes note of the broken ships and torn sails that littered the various islands, a warning for what could come to be. Venturing over a sprawling hill, Lucian spots another man not unlike himself. The man wore tattered robes and wrinkled skin, and was accompanied by a young boy and a dog. Like Endymion and the lamps, he too spoke Grecian and invited the crew into his home for meals and warmth. They slept within a giant tree, using the leaves for blankets and vines to climb atop the great oak, where they stored their supplies. They feasted on a diet of fish, birds, nuts, and herbs. The men shared their stories of how they came about this place. The older man, Centaurus, was a merchant sailor bound towards Sicily. During their travels, his crew was also set upon by the monstrous whale. It was only himself, his son, and the dog that survived. They'd been in the whale for over 27 years. Centaurus warns our dear sailors of the dangers within the whale. Men much older than himself have also found themselves lost here, and through some devilish arts, merged with the creatures of the deep to survive. Some of these included the Terricinians, eelmen with lobster-like features, the Tritonomandetans, giant catfish with the faces of men, and the warlike Paguridians and Cetipodians, who stalked the various islands with their shark-like teeth and razor-sharp claws. He warns Lucian that they themselves were dwelling in the territory of the Cetipodians, and would happen upon them sooner or later. On the 6th day, the Cetipodians came for the crew. Lucian's men were prepared and fended off the attackers. Frightful as they were, with their grotesque appearances, flesh bends to steel, and soon the Greek sailors drove the Cetipodians deeper into the whale's stomach. Of the casualties, 170 of the enemy fell, whereas only one of their own men did. Banding together 40 soldiers in garments of glass armor and steel swords, Lucian waged war against the Paguridians, Cetipodians, and Tritonomandetans. Hundreds of the mermen fell to their swords, and the rest, fearful of the men clad in glass, yielded. It was only the Terricinians who erred on the side of neutrality, brokering some form of peace with the humans. Lucian's men thrived in this environment, rescuing stray sailors, farming the grapevines, and fishing from the streams. For a time, they lived in a euphoric state, becoming masters of the land and sea within the cavern of the Leviathan. They even found a way to measure time, noticing that the whale rose to surface level every hour. But our story cannot end here. Not in this pit of a stomach, oh no. On the 6th day of the 21st month, the Colossus had swallowed at least 600 islands. The deafening sound of a mariner's cry and the stirring of oars were heard, which prompted our heroes to investigate. Within these masses were giants. Believe it as you will, dear listeners, for these stories are as true as the histories of Herodotus. Giants, over half a mile in height, sat on the islands, using them as equal to ships. For rowing, they utilized giant oak logs and had fastened the leaves into a makeshift sail. A giant rudder, half a mile in length, was stationed at the back of each mast with a single giant manning it. These creatures were similar to men in everything except their height and hair. Whereas our Grecian sailors had tufts of blonde, black, or auburn, these giants had a head of fire. blinding any mere mortal who dared look at them directly. The giants were at war with one another. In ways I cannot confirm, Lucian had understood the center of the squabble. The two captains, Aeliocentaurus and Thalassopotes, were at ends with one another. Supposedly, Thalassopotes had driven away a flock of dolphins that belonged to Aeliocentaurus. Aeliocentaurus, clearly displeased by the action, waged battle. Being swallowed by the whale did not hinder their capabilities for warfare. Island masses drove into one another, sinking both sides as they collided. Glass anchors the size of hills were thrown with devastating results, and giant oysters and shells were makeshift cannons, the giants throwing them with such ferocity they exploded on impact. In the end, Aeliocentaurus emerged victorious, sinking 150 enemy islands and capturing 3 with their inhabitants. The remaining foes retreated, pursued for a short distance before dusk. They returned to the wreckage, salvaging and recovering most of their own islands, and departed, erecting a trophy as a monument to the island fight. That night they anchored their immense glass anchors close to the beast, casting their cables around it. The following day, after performing sacrificial rites atop the whale and burying their dead, they sailed away in triumphant celebration, echoing songs of victory. Within the shadowy belly of the Leviathan, our sailors' morale crumbled. What was once a beautiful oasis was now a leveled, burning mess of island fires and cracked mountaintops. Lucian knew their time here was almost at an end and devised a way to escape the sea beast. Their first attempt involved digging an exit out the side of the whale. After delving 5 furlongs in, they realized the futility of this plan and etched another way out. Noticing how sickly the beast already was from the fires and damage done to its stomach, they assembled giant planks of ore and steel to hold open the maw. The plan was simple. With its weakened status, the colossus would lack the strength to shut its jaw once pried open by the beams. For 11 days, the men lit giant bonfires in hopes of making the whale sickly enough to surface. They had placed the folded contraptions at the mouth, 4 on each side, waiting to spring them into fruition. At the break of dawn on the 12th day, the creatures shot up onto the surface. The sailors heaved the beams from a contracted position and forced the beast open. With this, our Argonauts journeyed out of the land they had called home for nearly 2 years.